Welcome everyone. We're happy for you to be here today for our webinar on AI and living world towards ecological and transformative AI literacy. First off, I'd like to introduce everyone in the room today. Actually, Sarah, maybe you could tell us who are the participants that have come into the room from our little survey.
We have a number of participants from community education, faculty of education, other higher ed, and then a large number of people who are joining from other educational contexts. So if people are willing to introduce themselves in the chat, that would be appreciated. We have a number of people affiliated with the University of Toronto and other community organizations in higher ed, and some from elementary and secondary and TDSB.
Incredible. It's great. It's great to get all these people in the same room under the same goal. So today, I'm first off going to just introduce everyone. So we have Dr. Hilary Inwood, coordinator of SCAN, and also my colleague and collaborator, and Sarah Urquhart, also at WASY, and that we work closely with as well. And then my TDSB colleagues, Jen Vetter, Chris Metropolis. We also have a new manager of the Sustainability Office, Christine Wickett, so she might be with us today too. So today, just with the collaboration that we've had, we'll start with just this brief welcome, then land acknowledgement, and I'm really happy to introduce you to Dr. Maria Vamvalis as well, who will be speaking today. And also we'll be telling you a little bit about some of the upcoming learning events that we have with our collaboration with WASY and the TSB. With this collaboration, I often think of like asters and goldenrods, how they work together and cross-pollinate, how they bring so many different types of insects, different ones to the asters and the goldenrods. So this is something I've learned from the chapter in Braiding Sweetgrass by Robin Wall-Kimmerer, who is a Potawatomi botanist and author of several books, which I'm sure everyone here is familiar with. So that collaboration that these two flowers will bring different pollinators to them, sort of in the way that these webinars do as well. We get participants who are interested in climate change education, environmental education, and its effects, and moving that forward nationally and sometimes globally in these webinars. It makes me think of all the things that we learn together by working together. I like to just start in a good way with TDSB land acknowledgement. We acknowledge that we are hosted on the lands of the Mississaugas of the Anishinaabe, the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, and the Wendat. We also recognize the enduring presence of all First Nations, Métis, and Inuit peoples. I'd like to introduce you to Dr. Maria Vamvalis. She's the director of the Critical Thinking Consortium and founder. So Dr. Maria Vamvalis is an award-winning educator, researcher, and system thinker for over 20 years of experience at the intersection of climate justice, transformative learning, and regenerative system change. She's a former TDSB teacher who now serves as director at the Critical Thinking Consortium, where she works with educators and school leaders across Canada to embed critical inquiry, equity, and transformative thinking habits into education. Her doctoral research at WASY, University of Toronto, explored climate justice pedagogies that nurture learner agency, well-being, and collective action. I've had the pleasure of working with Maria for a very long time at the TDSB and now in our work with Climate Camp. She's one of the leaders with Hilary Inwood of Climate Camp at the TDSB, as well as some of the other initiatives that are happening across the board as well. And I'm really pleased to hear from her today. I'm excited.
Thank you so much, Alicia, and welcome everyone. It's wonderful to be with you today and also to see some familiar faces. As we get started, one of the things I just wanted to share, because I know that there's a broad audience here today, and I did want to share that this talk, being a SCAN talk, so the Sustainability and Climate Action Network, in conjunction with the Toronto District School Board, Canada's largest school board, is really geared towards K-12 educators. However, I believe that in this talk, if you are working with educators, if you are within teacher education. I think this will be relevant, and also perhaps just within your own community, to think about creating some space where, as we see this rapid integration of this technology, what I hope that we are doing right now is opening up some real space for discernment, for courageous leadership, and I think for some critically important conversations about this technology and how it is being integrated into education in the context of the current moment. So within education, I can say, having the real privilege of working across Canada with diverse school systems, school leaders, educators, I can say that I already see the rapid uptake of this technology. When I was working with the Elementary Teachers Federation in their big tech conference this year, they had asked me to come and do a keynote because they said that when they were trying to get teachers to basically use Google Docs, it was really challenging back in the day to sort of, bring technology into the classroom. And now we're seeing something very different, where we're seeing this really rapid integration with a lot of promises about what AI does. And certainly there's real ways that AI is making teachers' jobs that are very complex much easier, adjusting reading levels, creating rubrics, supporting lesson plans. So there's all kinds of ways that AI is being taken up by teachers. At the same time, I think it's important to note that our professional judgment is being outpaced by tools we did not ask for. And are we taking the time to thoughtfully pause and ask, at what cost and to whose benefit? So in the time we have today, we've got 45 minutes and then time for Q&A. I'm not going to respond to questions during the presentation because there are some things I want to engage us in, which is really a critical inquiry together. So I want to encourage you right now, if you have a piece of paper, a pen, or even, your laptop, I want to encourage you to create a little thinking space for yourself, because I'm going to lead us in a critical inquiry over the next 45 minutes around AI and education and the intersections of climate. Let's just set a little bit of context around one of the key issues within education is youth mental health. And we know that within the Canadian context, and of course, this data also plays out globally, we know that youth are extremely concerned about the impacts of climate change and that it is affecting their mental health and well-being. So a study that was done by Lindsay Galway and Ellen Field in 2023 that looked at 1,000 youth across Canada really looked at their climate emotions. So we know that 4 in 10 Canadian youth report that their daily lives are in fact being impacted by climate change, that 73% of young people think the future is frightening, that 6 in 10 believe the formal education system should be doing more to teach them about climate change, and 71% felt angry, 69% felt abandoned by their government, yet 71% felt that together we can do something. So I think what we're seeing in this data is the profound impacts of climate change and the projections about the future, how concerning those are for young people. And yet we still see this belief in our collective agency. At the same time, we also see that only half of young people believe they can contribute. So one of the questions that I want to invite us into within, those of us within education is, how do we continue to support the development of transformative agency, of the sense of agency in learners that they can, in fact, make a real difference and shift the trajectories of some of these really apocalyptic scenarios, if we're being really frank. My own doctoral research really was concerned about this question. As a classroom teacher, teaching in the context of climate change, recognizing the denial that, when I started teaching about over 20 years ago, being really concerned about how we were actually going to support youth well-being and mental health as the impacts of the climate crisis continued to unfold. And I want to draw out some key findings from that qualitative research, again, setting some context for this conversation about AI and education. Because in the qualitative research with both educators across Canada and youth activists, there were 6 principles. And I want us thinking about these principles as we, again, consider the intersections between AI and climate and youth agency. So the 6 principles, if we're really going to respond in robust ways within educational systems to the climate emergency, we actually need to be supporting our learners to develop interdisciplinary understandings of both oppressive and regenerative systems. We both need to understand the root causes of the climate crisis, but we also need to nurture a deep understanding of what can help regenerate systems, right? What it is we can be doing to actually bring back ecosystems in different ways, in ways that are possible, of course, given some of the complex realities. It was clear that relational paradigms, so paradigms that really ground us in our sense of interconnectedness. Of course, distinct Indigenous knowledge systems have that kind of relationality as part of the whole approach to education. We see aspects of this within holistic education, within land-based learning, supporting that deeper sense of our interconnectedness with all of life, that sense and recognition that we are nature. We also, in the study, it was clear that teachers had real trepidation around addressing the political dimensions of this work and this moment that we're in. And let's name things clearly. We're in a context of rising fascism, of authoritarianism, of disinformation and misinformation. And we actually, within our education system, need to be supporting learner abilities to actually engage in conflict productively, including, again, these questions about whether and how to use AI would be one example. The other principle was around relevant critical inquiries and more authentic assessments. So the importance of actually, engaging learners in the kind of deep inquiries that really, activate critical, creative, and collaborative thinking. That we orient citizenship learning sort of away from the individual and toward more collective intergenerational action, that we really put that frame, in the context of citizenship education and one of the core purposes of education right now. And of course, to make this happen, we need more robust structural support for transformative learning. And so when governments, for example, are facing a youth mental health crisis and are closing outdoor education centers, we're seeing how that structural support is not actually helping to address some of the, root causes of these problems. So I want to invite you right now to just take a moment and just record your own thinking. I'm sure you already have been thinking deeply about, AI and education and climate. That's why you're here in this session. And I want you to just take a little bit of time, and we're going to revisit this question. To record your own thoughts to this, that in a world being shaped by accelerating technologies and an ongoing ecological crisis, how might we as educators safeguard the human capacities that allow us to think deeply, act ethically, imagine boldly, and care for a flourishing world? So I'm going to give you a moment here, just to record your own thoughts. Again, I think that this is a question that, a number of us are thinking about. I think, part of this question may be why you're here. And I want to recognize that this conversation about AI brings up a lot of complex feelings for people. That right now, this conversation exists along a spectrum of, abolishing AI to absolute enthusiastic, adaptation, that this is truly one of the greatest things that's ever happened to humanity. And we really the conversation is existing along this spectrum. And again, what I want to invite us into here is a collective critical inquiry about this, that this technology is here, it is being used. It doesn't mean it's inevitable, but what needs to be true about it in order for it to lead to more regenerative futures? And that's really the question. I want to give us some criteria. What needs to be true of AI if it is to contribute to well-being for all living systems? What is the criteria? And I want you to take some time in your thought space right now And think about what criteria would you want to put around AI and what needs to be true about it for it to actually contribute to the well-being for all living systems. And here we do have some beautiful art by Métis artist Christy Belcourt. It's in the AGO. People who've been in sessions with me know I love this piece of art so much. To me, it really speaks to interconnectedness and flourishing. And, when life and vitality and reverence for life is at the center, just all the beauty that is possible when that is there, when we're grounding in that. So before we sort of unpack that criteria, and again, I welcome you to think about what criteria you think needs to be true of AI. I want to just ground us in a few anchoring concepts that if we are actually, those of us who are really committed to the kind of systems change work, working toward climate justice, and now we have this technology that's come onto the scene, and there's incredible complexity now that exists as we're trying, at the very moment, we're trying to make inroads and respond to climate. We also have the introduction of this technology. And so it's important that we are understanding that systems require seeing the whole. So bringing a systems lens to this, both educationally and supporting that in learners, identifying leverage points, addressing root causes to create meaningful and lasting change. And that's work from Donella Meadows. Those of you may be familiar with her wonderful work on systems. The climate crisis is not just an ecological issue, but it is a deeply systemic problem that's tied to colonial histories, to capitalist exploitation, and to social inequities. And so if we are actually wanting to transform these harmful systems to more regenerative systems, when we're informed by more decolonial perspectives. And I love Cree scholar Dwayne Donald's definition that colonization is really the extended process of learning how to deny relationships. If we're decolonizing, we're actually restoring relationships. And so this is a fundamental shift from oppressive systems, which actually fracture relationships at all levels through supremacy, through extractivism, through a profit motive above human dignity and decency. This requires a reconnection to natural principles and interconnection. So if we really want to move toward regenerative systems, then that sense of interconnectedness needs to be at the center. And I would go even further and say that, I genuinely believe that justice is love that has been made structural. And so I want us to be able to talk more boldly about love in these times and how we're actually bringing love to the forefront as a really key medicine in the context of a polycrisis that's deepening. So in my doctoral research, transformation describes this kind of holistic ontological shift. So we're dismantling the systems that are perpetuating harm while regenerating new, just, adaptive systems grounded in ecological sustainability, interdependence, and love. And this conception of transformation is inherently counter and decolonial. So returning now to that criteria around what needs to be true of AI if it is to contribute to well-being for all living systems, I want to argue that AI has to lead to increased justice, fairness, if we want to bring this criteria to young people, regeneration, ecosystem health, relational well-being, so caring about each other, and holistic and quality thinking, sound judgment. So, and again, we can have different criteria. These are the 4 that I've sort of picked to help guide our thinking around what needs to be true if AI is to contribute. So let's go deeply in, or let's kind of explore right now where is AI in terms of meeting this criteria right now? Is it meeting this criteria? There's a lot of talk about AI that there are things that it can do that support energy efficiency, that help farmers detect drought, and therefore be able to respond. So there's all kinds of ways that an argument is made about the way that AI can actually support this transition. And there is enthusiasm and excitement about its possibilities for innovation. One of the key questions, though, is can it fulfill its potential without harming the environment? So it is being used to deal with climate change, and yet it has its own emissions problem. The reality is that AI is not in the cloud. Just like this, our Zoom, our connection right now is not in the cloud. What we're doing right now is of the earth. We are already complicit, in the cables that are underground, in the fiber optics, and everything that is making it possible for us to connect in this moment. But I do think it's important to recognize, and I have prepared a list of resources for folks, and I encourage you to look at this website, The Anatomy of an AI System, that really goes into detail so that you recognize just how profoundly resource and earth intensive AI is. From the mining that occurs for the minerals that are needed, to the kind of digging for the fiber optic cables. We're going to talk about the water. We're going to talk about the workers, again, the invisibilization of workers who prepare the data, to all of the metals that are needed to build the data centers. Everything that is needed for this system. This is giving you just a little snapshot, and it is profoundly resource intensive. So again, it's sometimes so easy when we're, people talk about, using AI, and it seems like it is just like a Google search. And again, that is also energy intensive, but we're going to talk about what's a little bit different about AI in the current moment and how it's constituted, and bring it down to the earth. It's really important, I think, that we bring the cloud back into the earth and bring that understanding. Because AI is already using as much energy as a small country. There are now new gas-powered data centers that could emit more greenhouse gases than entire nations. A recent review of permits for data center projects shows they could emit more than 129 million tons of greenhouse gases per year. And if you are not, I'm going to let us take a moment here, because those, again, engaged in climate and the work of, climate emissions, this should really give us all a deep pause and if a little bit of terror, quite frankly, feeling that reality, that in this very moment where we need to be drawing down carbon, the way in which AI is currently being rolled out, it could emit more than 129 million tons of greenhouse gases. Some of you may be familiar with some of this data that has been circulating, but again, just wanting to give some statistics that sort of make it a little easier to understand sort of just how resource intensive it is. A request made through ChatGPT consumes 10 times the electricity of a non-AI search. Now, again, there are movements right now of renewable energy powering AI, or AI that is localized. So this is a complex and nuanced conversation. However, I do think it's important that we recognize that a lot of the LLMs that are currently dominating people's use, where the resource use actually is situated, recognizing that there's possibilities for this to shift. So again, we've got increased carbon emissions in an area where we should be focusing entirely on drawing down carbon use. So training a single AI model alone is equal to 300,000 kilograms of carbon emissions. And I'll give you a visual of that. It's the equivalent of 125 round trip flights between New York and Beijing. And so just to give you a sense of CO2 emission benchmarks, you can see there just how profoundly the carbon intensiveness of training an AI model. It is really quite profound. Right, comparing to an average human life in a year, an American life in a year, US car manufacturing and fuel consumption, and then the training of an AI model. and also the way we use AI. So there are certainly uses of AI. Some of the most resource intensive are not things that the average person is using it for, like these really sort of high stakes data analytics, though that is very, very energy intensive. But it is still really important to recognize that, using AI to make an image is much more energy intensive than, let's say, a search. That making an image with generative AI uses as much energy as charging your phone. Many people are starting to become more aware of the excessive water consumption that is, again, drowning out some of its more environmental contributions. So AI-related infrastructure will soon consume 6 times more water than Denmark, which is a country of 6 million people. Many data centers are also being built in areas where you could say that is a form of environmental racism, in areas where there is already a limited access to water. And so, putting it in communities that may have more difficulty in basically challenging what is happening, because there's already structural injustices that are playing themselves out. It's really interesting that there's some emerging technologies around closed loop systems, or using steam, or AI models that are not using as much water. So there's, again, some possibilities in innovation. But currently, this is where we are in terms of, again, the large scale LLMs that people are using. The UN has just declared that we're in a water bankruptcy, which means that already we don't have enough water for people. And currently, over 25% of the world's population already lacks access to water. So again, as we're thinking about our criteria and whether AI as it's currently constituted actually meets our criteria, we have some reasons for some really deep concerns that we actually need to be addressing in education. Another sort of unfortunate trend is that there are the companies like Meta, OpenAI, that had made commitments. I mean, certainly Meta and Google, that had made commitments to reducing carbon emissions, have sort of quietly withdrawn from that in the current moment. And just to give you a sense in terms of a transparency index, so originally Meta had a 60 out of 100 score on transparency. It's now gone down to 31 out of 100. Mistral, which is another AI system, went from 55 on transparency down to 18. And Meta and OpenAI originally were first in terms of transparency, something that they bragged about. They're now last and second last in terms of transparency. So as there is this rush for sort of profit and getting people's return on investment, we are definitely seeing this decrease in transparency, which is a growing concern. So again, these are issues that we need to be raising within education, and certainly equipping learners to respond, to this. Another point I did want to make is that AI currently has a greater carbon footprint than the airline industry, and that a single data center can consume the equivalent of the electricity for 50,000 homes. One single data center. So I want you to think about, again, data centers that are being built in communities where, maybe in your community, maybe close to you, that is the amount of electricity currently that is needed. Another core issue, thinking about this from a lens of justice, is the invisible labor and exploitation. So, there are data workers that actually have to clean data, that have to look at pornographic and highly violent images to remove them from an AI system. That work is currently done, for example, there was a study done in Kenya for $2 a day, and workers are actually experiencing post-traumatic stress disorder as a result of having this work. And that's one of the hidden shadows of AI that people are not aware of, just the invisible labor, the exploitation, the trauma that is actually being enacted, to make these systems safe. And another core concern is, from a justice lens, that AI is trained on inequitable data. And this is coming up more and more. Just for example, an AI system was to give funding out within a health context. And it did not fund, I think it was Black researchers. The AI system is trained on this inequitable data. University of Calgary study that facial recognition was 99% accurate on white faces and only 35% accurate on faces of people of color, and the most inaccurate were Black women. So again, we're seeing those structural injustices play out in terms of this data. And think about those real life implications, of these kinds of errors. So again, let's revisit our criteria here, that AI has to lead to increased justice, regeneration, relational well-being, and holistic and quality thinking. So as we've sort of engaged in some, core facts about AI, to what extent is it meeting this criteria? And recognizing that there's real possibilities, that there is some things that can be done, but what paradigm are we currently operating within with this technology? And how are we going to really take that up within education? So I just want to give you a moment here to come back to this inquiry, just based on what I've shared. You may have some thoughts that you want to add to this question in your thought space. So I'm just going to give you a moment here to do that. And encourage you to continue adding to this, as we go through. So let's really bring this now into education. Generative AI can produce fast answers, but actually it cannot think critically. I do have arguments about this. I mean, it is a pattern recognition. So I think it's important. I think it can do really powerful things. But it's important to recognize what it does. It's a very, very sophisticated pattern recognition system. And when we understand that, I think it actually can invite us to think more critically with it, as opposed to outsourcing critical thinking. It can't actually ask meaningful questions that stem from innate wonder and curiosity. It cannot make sense of local context. So again, thinking about this, from the lens of education, and where we want to put some of our efforts. AI also cannot, it can't actually feel, imagine, or empathize. It's not able to reason ethically. Again, it can be given prompts around this, but on its own, it's not capable of doing this. And it cannot accurately interpret lived experience. It also can't build relationships or community. Again, these are the human capacities we want to be centering within education. It's also not helpful, and there's some, really clear research about this around how learning design is really the key factor of whether AI is nurturing critical thinking or not. It's not helpful when it can just write the answer, when it completes a task in seconds, when it enables the avoidance of productive struggle, when it replaces imagination or voice, and when it bypasses reasoning. And so in these cases, it should not be central to the learning experience. And again, we're getting more and more research and evidence about this. But again, just wanting to highlight this for those of us within education. Through the work with the Critical Thinking Consortium, we've engaged in a pretty intensive research-informed process over the last 3 years. We involved youth in our study. We had some, international research through our work with school leaders, school systems, quite an engaged process. Really, our inquiry that we were putting forward is, how do we help learners thoughtfully navigate a challenging world? And so we were revising our own framework in light of, what's happening in the world. We've had a really strong framework for critical thinking over the last 30 years about how you intentionally teach critical thinking. And we've revitalized our framework, in I think some exciting ways. And we have identified these 7 transformative thinking habits that we see as dimensions of holistic intellectual growth that enable learners to build agency and confidence in tackling difficult problems. And we take very seriously calls from high-level policymakers worldwide for a more courageous move from the current mainstream ontology of separateness and self-centeredness toward one of entanglement and connectedness. And so sometimes you think about a habit of mind, and again, these are all still very valuable. Like, a habit of mind is something like having curiosity. I mean, that is incredibly valuable. A habit of mind is practicing, intellectual courage. This is also incredibly valuable. The habit of mind of, being very discerning are incredibly valuable. These are the 7 that we have identified that we want to really highlight and bring to the center of education in the current context that we think are most helpful for nurturing student agency and well-being. And so we want to be nurturing their critical mindedness, inquiry mindedness, accepting discomfort and learning, relational thinking, holistic thinking, courageous thinking, and visionary thinking. And we have a research paper about this. I've included it in a resource list that we're going to be sharing with you in the chat. And I encourage you to look at that and explore this in more detail. And we think we should all be practicing these 7 transformative thinking habits in the current context as well, and being really intentional. So if we're nurturing critical mindedness about AI within ourselves, and let's say with some of our older learners, there's some really powerful critical books right now: Empire of AI, Unmasking AI, the AI Con, the Atlas of AI. So we want to be nurturing that critical mindedness about AI, not just enthusiastically embracing it, but again, what is the criteria that's going to guide us about whether and how to use this technology? If we're nurturing inquiry mindedness, there's a wonderful collective, the Distributed AI Research Institute. A real story behind that, and the founder, Timnit Gebru, who was fired by Google for actually raising concerns about AI, and has now started this research institute, and they have a whole inquiry around the impact of AI on data workers. So this is something, again, that with some of our older students, we could be nurturing this inquiry mindedness about AI. Nurturing relational thinking about AI. There's been some really interesting, powerful work from the Gesturing Towards Decolonial Futures Collective on meta-relational AI. And again, I've included a link with some really interesting conversations, protocols, experiments with what happens if you actually train an AI system to have this ontology of interconnectedness, infused right in it. And I experimented with this, and it was really, really interesting and quite exciting, and made me think, wow, if we could just reduce the ecological impact, it would actually support us in making the transition a little bit faster. Within education, what the research is really clear about is that if we want students transformed and caught up in learning, we actually need to be designing tasks that are inviting them to think critically, collaboratively, and creatively. And so when we're thinking about learning design, this is what we want to be focusing on, and we don't want that to be outsourced to a machine. So how might we design tasks where we're not outsourcing the thinking? So how do we anchor in lived context, local places, community knowledge, personal experience, land, learning experiences that require observation, conversations, interviews, keeping these human capacities really at the forefront of education right now is so important. And I just want to give you an example of a student who went through a critical inquiry. This is from my grade 7 class. This was almost 10 years ago now, but we did this rich critical inquiry around how to respond to a changing world. And we had a thought book on the first day. This was one of my students. Before the inquiry started, this was the initial schema that they had, their initial mental model about, how we should be responding to our changing world. So this student was clearly caring about the learning, not necessarily challenged yet and caught up in it. And then again, it was a scaffolded critical inquiry over a number of weeks. And just to show what is possible through critical inquiry as a pedagogy, that this student by the end was saying how they've learned to be effective in their communication, show strong evidence to support my ideas, to find credible and relevant geographic evidence, and how this strengthens what I'm saying. This was an amazing learning experience. I feel changed. In the past, I was taught that yes, climate change exists, but it felt like something out there, something that others would deal with. I now understand in detail what contributes to the issue and what its impacts are. I also see that I can join others to be part of the solution. I am committed to making changes and making a real difference. And so we see that we've hit those higher levels of engagement. We're also seeing that we're nurturing that kind of collective transformative agency through rich critical inquiry. We really want to make sure that AI is not going to, is not going to take away from this kind of transformation that we want to be seeing in learners. Consulting, comparing multiple sources, critiquing or improving an AI-generated response, not just accepting it uncritically, analyzing impacts, ethics, relationships. How do we keep that at the forefront of learning design? So we're being really critically minded about the use of AI. And I want to invite you to think about some questions before using it in your context. Ask yourself, I think this is important, to what extent does this task warrant the ecological impacts of using it? How do I continue to prioritize learning systems? If you do use it, can you make a commitment to doing something for the land, to bringing that reciprocity back at some level, not just sort of imagining, again, those impacts are sort of externalized from us. How do we keep them really at the forefront? Which thinking habits will learners meaningfully practice? To what extent does AI deepen learning or shortcut it? How will students credibly show their thinking process? And how are lived experience, ethics, emotion, land, and/or community thoughtfully integrated in this learning? And to what extent will students critique AI, not just consume it? So I'm going to give you just a few examples, sort of as we're coming to a close, of just some ideas of some rich learning, some rich inquiries and tasks that can actually nurture these kinds of transformative thinking habits. So thoughtfully documenting powerful examples of earth-based wisdom in words, visuals, movement, and sounds. This brings us back into our bodies, back into our connection with the earth. Reimagining our community in 20, 50, or 100 years if it began to meaningfully honor treaty relationships. Designing a healing or medicine garden that honors local species, and creating a research-informed physical activity guide that is climate aware. And again, relational thinking. If we're nurturing intentionally relational thinking, could we have students thoughtfully evaluate whether an AI response or its use considers emotions, ethics, community impacts, place, land connections, cultural knowledge, relational implications? Maybe we invite students to actually map the ripple effects of rapid AI integration across cultures of learning, ecosystem health, and well-being, highlighting the interconnections between critical thinking, ecological impacts, and learner agency. Let's bring this right into the center of learning, right? The core issues that AI is raising. If we're, if we want to encourage that kind of visionary thinking, what if we have students design futures where the criteria for AI that we've identified here is actually met? What needs to be true? What would that look like? What needs to happen to the current AI models as they're currently being rolled out and implemented? Or students designing future-oriented alternatives that AI cannot or did not envision. And so again, helping students see that, your own capacities, your own imagination is so valuable and brings so much, to what we can do together. And, bringing it back to the natural intelligence that is really billions of years old, that mushrooms actually make rain, that whales cool the climate, that foxes green the tundra, plankton creates clouds. There is an intelligence behind the success of the natural world. And that the life that we have is really over millions of years of selection. And that's what life does. It creates conditions that are conducive to life. Leave it better than you found it is actually the way life works. And Lean Goranson, an innovation biologist, calls this natural intelligence because it represents life's logic behind the 3.8 billion years of success on planet Earth. And interestingly enough, when ChatGPT was asked about the most profound source of intelligence, it said itself that nature knows best. And so this is something we want to be, keeping at the forefront. You can connect with me through the Critical Thinking Consortium. I also have a regenerative field of practice. It's a space for us to actually practice more regenerative ways of being, to, put our reverence for life really at the center of what we're doing. And so, please feel free to reach out. I've got also a link to that in the resource list. And so as we come to a close, I invite you again to think about what you're taking away, maybe as thinking about, I hope that through this time we've had together, you have more thoughts in relation to this question about, in this world being shaped by accelerating technologies and an ongoing ecological crisis, how might we as educators safeguard the human capacities that allow learners to think deeply, act ethically, imagine boldly, and still care for a flourishing world? So I want to thank you for your leadership in shaping regenerative futures. I wish us all courage in these times, courage and love, and what we need to do to continue to support life and the flourishing of life on this planet. And Sarah, if you want to put the resource list in the chat, and I'm really happy to answer any questions that folks might have.
Thank you so much, Dr. Maria Vamvalis. You've given us a lot to think about, and looking at the chat right now, I'm just amazed at the understanding and the expertise in the space here today. I think we have a lot to think about today, like moving forward, and I really like the thoughts of like thinking about it creatively, critically, and collaboratively. Very important as well, and thinking about the where of AI as well. We have a lot of questions in the chat, so maybe we could take a few. Maybe Ron, would you like to start?
Yes, thank you, Maria. Amazing. Thank you so much. I am retired, 73 years old, and a student of eco-theology at Regis College. And your presentation really fascinated me. I have one comment and one question, perhaps. On May 25th, of course, as a student of eco-theology, integral ecology has been an important part based on the Laudato Si document or encyclical from Pope Francis in 2015. But on May 25th, Pope Leo is to publish his first encyclical, which will be based on AI, which I'm sure you're aware of. And I just read a document, as a matter of fact, this afternoon, and someone wrote, Pope Leo's AI encyclical is coming. Don't let ChatGPT read it for you. So I thought the time was quite appropriate with your presentation. And my question is, I've been following very much a researcher, Dr. Sasha Lucioni, which has done a lot of research in terms of a relationship between AI and climate change. She's been on TV and on radio quite a bit, and I was wondering if you obviously you're saying yes, her obviously.
I have one of her papers actually in the resource list. She does great work around this, and again, really contributing to the critical conversation about AI and climate.
Thank you so much again.
Thank you, Ron.
Thank you. And before, I think we're running out of time a little bit, and I just want to make sure that we highlight some of the upcoming events. Part of the collaboration between TDSB and Noisy, we've got the Cultivating Connections Regeneration Through Indigenous Creativity, which will be happening on May 26th, Tuesday, May 26th, 4:30 to 6 o'clock. We're currently sold out for that, so that's just a celebration across the TDSB of the work that's been done throughout the year. And Climate Camp 2026 is in person between August 24th to 27th. We are nearly sold out, but we still have a few places for TDSB teachers if they are interested. This has been an ongoing work that we've been doing, and I've been to Climate Camp now for 3 times now, and it's incredible. So I highly recommend it. And also we have more webinars that will be coming next year as well. So that could be all found on the website either at OASI or TDSB to Sustainability Office. Anyway, well, thank you very much, and thanks for everyone for being here today. I've learned so much from the chat, from everyone here today. Thank you.